my name is Shelby. Welcome back to Little Literary Love. I'm glad y'all are with me today. Today we're going to be doing my June end of month wrap up. So I slowed down a lot in the latter half of June. Like the first half, I read a ton of books. So I think that kind of burnt me out a little bit for the second half of June. So I wasn't able to get as many in. And then I just wasn't really caring for some of the books that I was reading. And I had some other stuff going on in my life. So I don't know. I wasn't as in big of a reading prowess, if you will. But I did read 11 books in the latter half of June. So that puts my total for the entire month of June at 27 books, which is astounding. Like that is the most amount of books that I have probably ever read in a month. So I'm pretty proud of myself for that. But yeah, so we're gonna get right into the books that I read. So the first few books I was reading for the Queer Romance Readathon, which if you haven't seen that vlog, I posted that, so I'll put that up in the cards. So the first like 3 books, I believe. Yes, the first 3 books that I'm going to talk about, because that week was like the middle of where my cutoff is for the half of the month. So the first one is going to be Mangles and Mistletoe by Adriana Herrera, and this was a like novella. This is a female romance. I ended up giving this one 3 stars because it wasn't like a super one that like really stood out to me. It wasn't super memorable, but I did for the most part enjoy it while I was reading it. It's about these 2 women that they were flown to, I think, somewhere in Scotland, and are competing on this like Christmas baking competition for like the cooking channel or something, and they get paired up, and at first they don't like each other, and one is more like a home baker and one is like a professional baker of sorts. So they get paired up, and then of course they're also very attracted to one another, and they do end up falling for each other and getting together by the end of this. Like I said, this is just this is okay. It was a cute little like Christmas novella if you're like wanting something Christmassy to read, and like I said, it is sapphic. It is a female romance. The steam on this I would consider more medium to high steam, but it wasn't bad. Then I read Give Me More by Sara Cate, which is the newest release in her Salacious Players Club series. This one is a MMF story. This is about a married couple, Hunter is one of the other owners of this club, and his wife Isabel, and they are best friends with Drake, which you've seen Drake in some of the other books. He is a like construction worker, and they like have him come in to help expand their space and like add on different things. So in the start of this book, they are going on a like road trip to see like different sex clubs and how other clubs like run things and maybe kind of partner with some of them. And Hunter discovers, because they are going to this one place where they have like a class on, I think it was like shibari or just like in general like bondage, like rope type things, and they ask Isabel and Drake to be like guinea pigs, I guess, and to like help participate in this teaching. And so then Hunter watches them, and he gets really turned on by Drake and Isabel like being together, even though they didn't do anything. They weren't like sexually together for this demonstration, but he just gets this idea that he really wants them to have sex together. And so they do, but then it kind of ends up turning into like Drake is bisexual and also has a thing for Hunter, and Hunter also kind of has a thing for Drake, but he's kind of like hiding those feelings from himself because of some things that have happened to him in the past. But this was really good. I ended up giving this 5 stars, but I think I may bump it down to like 4.5 stars or maybe 4 stars, just because of the more like memorability factor, I usually tend to give my 5 stars to books that I can't stop thinking about. And since reading this, like, I've pretty much forgotten it, but it was really good. I did really like the depiction of this polyamorous like throuple, because I like when I'm reading a throuple romance where all of the characters have an equal part in it, and it doesn't get too one-sided with like 2 people, which could have happened with this since Isabel and Hunter are married, but it didn't. It was very equal with all of them, and I really enjoyed that. So there's also, so like I said, this is M and F. This is a friends to lovers, since Drake and Hunter are like best friends. And then we also have Cuckold, I think is how you say that, where like basically, like I said, Hunter wanted to watch his wife have sex with somebody else. There is trigger warnings for past abuse, and the steam on this was very high. So I have thoroughly enjoyed literally all of the books that have come out in this series, and I couldn't recommend it enough. Then we have Mechanics of Love by Meka James. So this is going to be the last book that I read for the Queer Romance Readathon. This is another sapphic romance, and this is about Irene, and she is getting divorced from her husband because she is fed up with him, because he has basically been cheating on her their entire marriage, and she's finally had enough. And so she's leaving him. So she's driving back to her hometown, and something happens to her car and it like breaks down, so she has to call a mechanic, and the mechanic that helps her out ends up being Remy. And Remy and Irene went to high school together, and they didn't really get along. Remy thinks that Irene is just very pretentious and stuck up, when in reality Irene has had a crush on Remy. So this ends up turning into like their romance. I really enjoyed this. I gave this one 4 stars. I liked their romance because this one is more of a slow burn of a romance. Mostly because Remy has trouble with, like, she's the kind of person that kind of holds a grudge and has trouble like letting some things that Irene did in the past like go. Whereas Irene is like really trying to convince her like, hey, I actually do really like you, and I would like to be in a relationship with you. Like, I'm not faking this. So there are some things that they do have to go through with that. I also really like this because this features both of our heroines are over the age of 40, which I really liked because I don't really read that a ton in my romances. Most romances that you pick up, the characters, or at least one of the characters, are typically in their 20s, maybe early 30s, but you don't hardly see like romances between characters that are over the age of 40. So I really like that as well. There are a lot of trigger warnings in this. There are trigger warnings for infidelity, menopause. So Irene she went through menopause before she could kind of decide like if she wanted a baby or not. And it's kind of a little bit upsetting for her. There is also family member with a chronic illness in this, and I would consider this a medium steam. Then I was kind of like still on the high from reading all these like queer romances and wanted to continue reading more. So then I read Vibe by Liza James. This is a dark romance. This is another sapphic romance. This is about one of our characters, Aura, and at the very start of this, you kind of figure out that she comes from a cult and somehow she escaped that cult. And so now she's out in everyday life, and she and her boyfriend and best friend decide that they're going to go to a strip club. And Ruby is there, who's our other main character of the story, and she is a stripper at this club. And when Ruby comes on the stage to do her like performance, Ruby and Aura have this instant connection and instant attraction to each other, which startles Aura because from her cult, she was raised to believe that like homosexuality is wrong. But then she's also with her boyfriend, but Ruby just kind of keeps popping up and they just like, their connection is just so tight. They just like can't get enough of each other. I gave this 4 stars. I loved this. This is like the kind of sapphic romance that I want to read. I was obsessed with these 2 characters and their love story. Now granted, like I said, it is a dark romance, so there are plenty of trigger warnings. Cheating is in this, but it is very brief. Then there is like assault, sexual assault. There's a lot of like dark things that are happening with Ruby and her backstory and her life. There's violence. There's also a murder that happens. So it's pretty dark, but like I said, I gobbled this up. I read this so quickly. It was so good. And then the steam on this was very high. Then I read The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics by Olivia Waite. This is a historical romance, and again, this is another sapphic romance. So I wanted to read a sapphic romance in a historical type setting. I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember a ton of what happened in this book. I did give this 3 stars. I remember it's about this girl and she is like a astronomer scientist of sorts, and she ends up going and meeting with this countess who had been conversing with her through her like father, I believe, who is also an astronomer. So she's wanting this girl to like translate some like book or something that was in French. I don't know. Anyway, I gave this 3 stars because I did end up getting kind of bored with this book, mostly because our 2 characters got together pretty quickly in this book, and then there is a lot of like women power kind of stuff because they're battling with some sort of like scientific board or something back in the day to be able to like be taken seriously as a scientist, because they don't think women have the intelligence to be able to do that. So that was kind of cool, but at the same time I felt like there was too much of that in this book and I was really missing the romance of it. But yeah, and then I would consider this steam like medium. Then I read Love and War by Shirra Lynn. This is another historical romance, but this is a more modern historical romance, which I haven't ever read before, because this takes place in World War II, and this features an interracial couple. So our heroine of the story, she is Black, and I believe she is like a jazz singer or some sort of like singer at a club, and they're in Paris, I believe. And she is one day like walking somewhere and starts to get harassed by these like Nazi soldiers, and then our hero of this story, he is a doctor with the Nazis, and he sees her getting harassed and he goes to try to save her by telling them that she is his like housekeeper. So she ends up having to like pretend and like go with him and become his housekeeper just to like keep her safe, since she's Black and, you know, Nazis and all of that. So I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. I listened to this on audio, which I really liked because it was it reminded me of those audiobooks that are like the graphic audiobooks, where their tagline, it's like a movie in your head, because the audiobook, just the regular audiobook for this, had like a full cast, and then there was also like sound effects that they did too. So that was really cool and I really enjoyed that. I also, one thing I did want to note, that I did get a little bit confused by doing an audio because there are some back and forth with like time jumps. So it goes back, like we have some part of the story like modern day where our heroine is telling this story to her daughter who is pregnant. So that got a little bit confusing when it would jump back and forth, but I did appreciate us having some little snippets from the like modern stuff, mostly because I feel like this book would have gotten really, really, really dark, which it is still pretty dark, but I liked that we had that just so that we as the reader would know that this does end in a like happily ever after kind of thing. So I really like this, and I would consider this theme on this high. As you can expect, there are many trigger warnings for this book because it does take place with World War II, with Nazis. There is like racism because of that. There is sexual assault. There's a lot of things going on with it, but it was really good and I really enjoyed it. Then I read Carnage Island by Lexi C. Foss. This is a paranormal romance, and this, I would also consider this an Omegaverse romance. This is about our heroine, and she is a shifter, and she has been betrothed to the son of the head alpha of another pack, and it's kind of their like wedding of sorts when they're meeting, and this is the first time that she's been able to shift into her wolf. And when she does, her would-be mate rejects her, so she gets sent to this island that's kind of known as like the Reject Island. And then there is this pack, and it's a pack of alphas that have formed together. They find her and they're all very attracted to her and want her to be their mate. So this is a reverse harem story, and like I said, it is Omegaverse. I gave this 3.5 stars. I did enjoy most of this, like especially the first half of this book. I loved. I was just living for this story. But then we get into a lot of like politics between the different like shifter clans, and then there was lots of like different like alphas like trying to keep her safe from other stuff that was going on, and it just like went way over my head, and we got away from the romance of the story, and that I just didn't really like. It lost me after that. So yeah, 3.5 stars. The steam on this was high, which I loved. Then I read Kink Camped, Hunted by Adriana Anders, and I believe this is a pretty new story. This is about our heroine is at a kink camp, which is basically just a camp that people can go to for like a week, and there's lots of different sexual activities, and you can enjoy whatever type of like kink is your fancy. So our heroine of the story has a primal kink, which if you're not aware of what that is, it's basically like if you want to be a prey, you like being like chased, and sort of similar to like consensual non-consent, like you're forced to have sex with the person that like catches you. So she is really into this. This is her kink, and she sees there's like a message board where people can put like ads of what they're kind of looking for, and she finds an ad where somebody is wanting to do this. So she's like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And then later, and then the ad was like, it's a one-time thing, and then we're not gonna talk to each other ever again. Well, then afterwards, both of them end up wanting to do it again. And then you find out the guy that does it, you find out that he's actually the owner of the camp. So I gave this 3 stars. I thought this was a really interesting premise for a story, and I believe they're going to have more books in this. Like, I think this is going to be a series, and there's going to be more books, and I'm very intrigued to read on and read more of what could be in this. However, my issues with this story was that I feel like the romance was very subpar. Like our characters, they don't know each other in our first interaction, and they get together and they have this really, really steamy sex scene, and then it kind of just goes downhill after that. Our next few interactions, they start to kind of start like talking with each other again, and they start to kind of get to know each other. but our sexual interactions are not as good and not as steamy, which kind of made me sad. So overall, I would consider this more of a medium-high steam. There are also trigger warnings in this for death of a significant other. Then I read Priest by Simone because I am rereading all of her backlist currently, or at least I'm trying to. So Priest was next on the list, and I kind of also picked this up because I was starting to kind of feel like in a slump. And yeah, so this is the third time that I've read this book, and I finally bumped up my rating to 5 stars for this. I have previously only rated this at 4.5 stars, mostly because there is like one thing that happens in this that bugs the crap out of me, but I love this book so much, and it also has that memorability factor again. I am constantly thinking about this book, and it's just like always in my mind. Like, I can't let it go. This is basically my ideal book. I love it so much. So if you're not aware what this book is about, this is about a priest, and it's basically told from his perspective. And one day he is in the like confessional like thing. I don't know, I'm not Catholic, so if I like screw up talking about this, like, I'm sorry. He's in like the confessional, and there is a woman that steps in, and she is confessing her sins, and she's basically like starts confessing that she is a sexual person, she is a sex worker, and he, just from like her talking, is so turned on by her. So they kind of start a relationship, and I just die for this book. I love it so much because not only is it crazy steamy, but the steam has purpose. Like, their erotic sexual scenes together serves a purpose to bring these two characters closer together. But then we also don't have just the steam. They have interactions outside of like the church and outside of having sex together, and he really starts to get to know her as a person and fall in love with her that way too. But I also love that we have his perspective, because as a priest, he has a lot of emotional turmoil over being attracted to this woman, over falling in love with this woman, and some of the activities that he does with her. He has all this like feelings of guilt, and he's feelings of shame, but then he's also just so deeply in love with this woman. So he just, throughout this book, he is struggling a lot with what to do. And I just love this so much. This is, like I said, this is probably like my ideal type of book, because the steam is crazy high. The sexual scenes, like I said, they have a purpose, but then there's so much emotion to this story too. And I just, I gobble it up. I love it so much. Yeah, so I very much enjoyed rereading this, and I'm sure this is one that I'm going to continue to reread because it's so great. Then continuing on with reading some more Simone stories, I read the Seduction and the Persuasion of Molly O'Flaherty, which both of those are in this book. They were separated out, but then she put them together because the Seduction is actually more of a very short novella, and then we get to, well, they're both kind of even together, they're a novella, but the first one is like even shorter. So anyway, so I'm gonna kind of talk about this together since it is now together as a story, which I think makes more sense because the first part is only like 20 pages, maybe. So this is about Molly, which we had first read about her in the Markham Hall series. She is Irish, and she owns her own company. It was actually passed down from her father. and she is in trouble of losing her company because the board of her company wants her to get married, and they say if she doesn't get married, they're gonna end up selling her company away from her. So she has to get married, and she's been in love with one of her best friends for a while, and they finally start to kind of give in to their desires and want to like really maybe be together. But then he kind of freaks out about it and sleeps with somebody else, and then they kind of like go their separate ways. So then he's kind of like, I'm gonna just tell you right now, I gave this 3 stars, mostly because I couldn't stand the male character of the story. He drove me bonkers and I hated him. But yeah, so he finally, like after some time, he finally kind of like pulls his head out of his ass and returns and is like, is gonna grovel to Molly and be like, I want to be with you. But of course, because she is such a headstrong and intelligent woman, she's like, no, that's not gonna happen because I can't trust you anymore, that you're not gonna cheat on me. So that's where the story is. I haven't read the second book of this yet, but I will, just to kind of see where their story goes. But this is pretty high steam, as for on par with Sierra Simone's books. So I did enjoy the steam on this. Just like I said, the male character of this drove me crazy and I couldn't stand him. Then the last book that I read for June is going to be Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. This is, I can't remember which, is this the 4th book of the Throne of Glass series? I think this is the 4th book. So again, we're just kind of continuing on with this series. In this one, all of our characters, like the 3rd book, they had kind of like gone their separate ways. And this one, we're kind of bringing everything back together a little bit. I gave this 3 stars. I had problems with this, which is surprising because this is apparently a lot of people's like favorite book of the series. So I was very disappointed with this. So I'm kind of worried about how the rest of this series is going to go. The first half of this book I found to be quite boring, and I really didn't care for like anything that was happening. But then I bumped it up to 3 stars because the last like 100-200 pages of this book got so good and so many things happened that I was just like, what is going on? I loved the last like bit of this book. It was so good. The other thing that I did not care for this was Aylin, that's how you say her name. I get that we're supposed to be having this like big character growth with her. I did start to like her a little bit more in the last book, but now in this one, I went back to not liking her. I just really don't care for her as a character and as a person. I think she's very selfish, and I just don't really think that she's like the end all be all greatest person to walk the earth kind of deal. So I didn't care for her. I also really don't care for the ships that are happening, like the relationships, the romances, because in this one we're starting to see Aylin getting pushed with Rowan, which Rowan is fine and all, and I feel like I'll end up enjoying the romance eventually, but I just didn't really care for it. And then I hated Kale is another side character, and I loved him in the first couple of books, and I absolutely hate where his character arc is going. And they've also introduced another character that I think is going to end up being in a relationship with Kale, which I don't understand, and I don't like it at all. I think it's completely unnecessary that Sarah J. Maas is trying to like pair up these characters, and I just don't care for it. So, oh, and then also Dorian is another character. Guys, the things that happen with Dorian in this book is bonkers, and I like feel so much for him. He was one of probably like my least favorite characters at the beginning, but I just want to like hug him. He goes through so much. He is probably now one of my favorite characters. But yeah, there's just a lot of things happening in this. So I will continue this because I really want to finish this series and say that I have read this and say that I have read all of Sarah J. Maas's works, but I am really not vibing with this series. So, but yeah, that's gonna be it for this video. If you enjoyed this, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and leave a comment down below with some of your favorite books that you read in June. I'd really like to hear from you. If you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you can see more videos from me. And otherwise, I will see you on the next one. Bye guys.